right? So the stuff that we're talking about today, I don't want men to just get stuck in, no, you're just talking about gender-based violence prevention and just dogging out men. No. This collective socialization of manhood, this man box, it's killing us too.
A new term to some listeners. Mm-hmm. How would you define the man box for those who may not have heard it before?
In reality, what we're talking about is the collective socialization of manhood. But the man box is catchy. The man box can get men to kind of sit up and say, what's that? You know, the man box is a way to frame a conversation around male socialization with men that they can grab a hold of quickly. You know, with boys is an excellent tool. Like we'll ask boys, we have a box, right? What are all the ingredients in that box that define what it means to be a man? To be tough, to be strong. And like they're putting the ingredients. Some folks have actually done, you know, a physical exercise, have a box there and write down what defines what it means to be a man. And the boys write it down. And then you start pulling the pieces of paper out of the box to be tough, to be strong, to be aggressive, to be dominating, to be in control, to not value women and girls, you know, to see women as the property of men, women as objects, particularly sexual objects, you know, no pain, no fear, you know, don't be vulnerable, you know, don't be queer, don't be gay, you know, all of these stereotypical and very complex in their own right definitions of what it means to be a man, you know, are in this box. And so we call it the man box. In a more technical way, we would say the collective socialization of manhood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's a really helpful tool because as you were listing all the things that would be inside the box, I think those might be familiar to people of like, oh yeah, like I know what he's talking about, or like I know the kind of traits that he's talking about, but seeing it collectively as like a rigid boundary of the box is helpful to see that it's quite constricting. And so what are the effects of the man box on men and boys?
Well, to your point about it being constricting, for many of us, we're held hostage to the box. You know, some of us know this box is not cool, it's not good, right? But we're afraid to operate outside the box, right? How other men will view us. They'll view us as weak. They'll view us as soft. You know, and in some cases, it's dangerous for men to operate outside of the box. So for some of us, we kind of move in the box, out the box. We kind of know how we're negotiating this box based on our given situation. So it really helps men also to begin to do their own insight therapy around who am I as a man? Because once I know that the man box exists, you know, once you know, you know. And so I know when I'm in it, I know when I'm out of it. That's important, right? Because that's progress actually. Because for the most part, we're kind of on remote control as men, just doing tradition, whatever's been passed down to us. It's not even about a box. I'm not even thinking about it. I'm just doing whatever I've been taught that it means to be a man. Here we're talking about being held hostage to the box actually means I've made some progress because I'm aware that a box exists. And so I'm moving and grooving. In this situation, I might be in the box. This one, I'm comfortable being out of the box. I done forgot actually the question you asked me. And this, you know, but our work is to help men to be their authentic selves, right? That's at the core of our work is authenticity, right? We believe, for the most part, authenticity is healthy, you know? So helping men to be their authentic selves is important.
Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I could see men and boys seeing this box as actually like a code of conduct or a set of goals of like, I'm actually going to lean into this and this is like a guidebook. Is it helpful to replace the man box like with a different set of rules or a different, like if a young man feels he needs a North Star and some kind of guide, like what other sources could they pull from that wouldn't just be, all right, I'm going to just chill in this box because I know I'm going to get rewarded for that.
Yeah, and that's part of the challenge. I know I'm going to get rewarded for staying in the box and adhering to the codes, as you said. And until we normalize healthy masculinity, there's a tremendous amount of fear. Still, some boys feel like pioneers operating outside the box. Even some men and women, parents raising their sons who know better, will still feel like pioneers. I don't really want to put my son out there to kind of lead the charge on this because, it's not going to be too comfortable for him. So sometimes it's difficult to help boys to see the gifts and the rewards of operating outside of the box. But if you allow yourself to think about it, women live longer than men, by and large. Women are healthier than men, by and large. Men complete suicide 4 times at the rate of women, by and large, right? Women know who they are emotionally, right? By and large, there's an epidemic of loneliness amongst men, by and large. Most men can't even tell you or don't have, I won't say can't tell you, but they say 1 out of 7 men don't have a best friend, right? By and large, right? And then even when we do have a best friend, what we tell him versus what we don't tell him, he's not getting it all.
Mm-hmm.
Women to give it all up to each other. He's not getting it all. Some of us, myself as an example, I have about 4 buddies that are really, really close to me, but I haven't gotten to the point where I give it all to any one of them. I might talk to this one about work. I might talk to this one about church. I might talk to this one about play. I might talk to this one about kids. I might talk to this one about I haven't, in who I am in this work, I haven't gotten to a place where I can just give it all to one man. That level of vulnerability, and trust to have in another man is challenging for us as men. It's very, very challenging. I think with from the time we're boys, we're taught more to compete with each other than to love and trust each other, right? And that travels with us, throughout our journey of life. So even when we know better, it's difficult. Sometimes I think about it as a man who knows better. If we was going to quantify it, who's worse? The guy who knows better and still does it, or the guy who's just on remote control and doesn't even know there's any, any better, So helping boys to understand, their emotional well-being, again, something that's not attractive to boys. What do you mean by emotional well-being? Helping them to just understand that, how important it is to be authentic, to not, we call it at the Call to Men, don't be your role self, be your whole self, right? Helping boys to embrace that and the joy in that, but it can be elusive, to understand as a boy the benefit of that.
Mm-hmm.
It's much easier to teach a man who's, been on this journey of life what he's missed out on, as a result of that.
Yeah. I feel that as also thinking about this a lot and doing the work, and there's a lot of filling like my head with knowledge, but then there's a disconnect, not all the time, but sometimes with my heart.
Yeah.
Where I know what's right, or I have the knowledge, or I've read the book, or I've listened to the talk, and sometimes I act it out and sometimes I don't. And it's definitely not 100%, and I definitely struggle with that too, where it's like I know the more I share, the better my relationships get, but sometimes I can't or won't.
Yeah.
And I know in my head that that's harmful and kind of hurting myself.
Right.
But it's hard, like you're fighting against many, many years of training, basically.
Training. And we'll say I can't, but it's not, it feels like I can't, but it's really I won't. we talk a lot at a call to men about, moving from our heads to our hearts. And that's what you're talking about right here. And a big part of our work is transformational work, right? We don't invest in transaction. We invest in transformation. And to move men from their heads to their hearts, that could be a long distance with, a lot of roadblocks, a lot of detours. But that's central to our work, is reaching in and grabbing the hearts of men, ensuring that they leave our presence thinking and feeling differently than they did when they
how do you do that?
One of the ways, that's a fair question. One of the ways is to be vulnerable yourself, to give up yourself. I can't ask you to move, forward if I'm not willing to demonstrate that, right? So as trainers, as facilitators, as teachers with a call to men, we have a particular way of being with men. And that requires us to be transparent. That requires me to give of myself if I want you in return to do such. There's no big I's and little U's. We're all in this together as men. I don't have this thing down to a science, right? So I'm not an expert at nothing, right? Anything. I'm not an expert. I do have some information. I want to share it with you, and maybe we can get on this journey together. So it's a way of being with men that allows them to feel comfortable in our presence to then get on the journey together. Storytelling is important, sharing experiences, sharing stories, and not just you sharing, but I'm also sharing. And so it's just how to be together, is to move away from so much of what we've been taught, like to compete. Everything is competition, right? Mm-hmm. Everything is one-upping the other guy. And there's not a lot of room for truth-telling when we're one-upping. Mm-hmm. Because one-upping means I want to win. And in that process of one-upping, sooner or later I got to lie, right? Because I don't have nothing left. And then you'll lie because you don't have nothing left. Mm-hmm. So it's not an honest conversation in many respects. It's just really based on winning. I can remember as a young guy, you probably done this too, we'll be one-upping each other, and sooner or later somebody will say, "Man, you know you lying." And we both would do just that. We both would do just that. We'll start laughing. We both know we're lying. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's about winning, right?
Yeah, it's about the game. Yeah. It's about playing the game. Yeah. We're both playing the game.
Yeah, we're just playing the game. And so how do we as men move away from that and then begin to share that experience with boys and give them permission to move away from it also?
Yeah. No, it's really helpful to hear how, and it makes perfect sense how you model it and have to demonstrate and take the first step, like, okay, this is safe to do. I'm going to share something. And that indicates that it's okay for others to as well. And for some reason, it made me think of like the classroom experience in school where the focus is, like you said, about one-upping and better grades and better sports. And then there wasn't really a space for level ground of like, I'm going to share this, I'm going to share a challenge, a weakness, and it's not going to be taken advantage of. It's just going to be accepted and listened to. And at least for me, that mm-hmm. space did not exist. And I can see how that kind of incorporated into a classroom, an institution, a curriculum could grow better connections between people, because there's more trust. It's like, mm-hmm. I'm going to share something that is not going to be used against me by someone else.
Right.
And not all environments are like that, but just having that knowledge early on in a young person of like, okay, I can find people where I can do this and it will build together as opposed to being used against me.
Yeah.
And I think proof of that would be really helpful in schools.
Yeah. Yeah, and I just, and again, without a doubt, in schools, we need more men in schools,
Mm-hmm.
right? More men teaching young boys in school, not just maybe on a college level or, you know, where as a professor you can feel a sense of prestige in
Mm-hmm.
yourself, but to be with boys, and so it's not about such a sense of prestige as much as it's giving,
Mm-hmm.
you know. We need more of that, you know, and demonstrating and modeling. And we're still not at a place of normalizing healthy masculinity. We're still struggling with that. And those who are contrary to that, particularly in the age of social media, you know, unfortunately, they're doing well,
Yeah.
you know, and we got our hands full.
Mm-hmm.
And we really need a critical mass of men to join arms with us.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we really, really do. That's why we invest in working with the men who men look up to. We spend a lot of time with athletes,
Yeah.
professional athletes, college athletes, high school athletes. We spend a lot of time with them because they're the boys and men that, you know, they're the men that men look up to. They're the boys that boys look up to. Coaches. We do a lot of clinics with coaches, helping
Mm-hmm.
them to understand that at the end of the day, their job is not just the X's and O's of a game.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. They need to know how important they are.
How important you are. In some cases, we don't even know your name. We just know you by coach.
Mm-hmm.
That's all that's important, right? Coach is your name. Your title is your name. And that's because of the respect that we have for coaches, you know, and to help them to understand their role is way more important than their own individual win-loss record.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I always, when I'm speaking to coaches, I give a football analogy that looks the same with other sports. But you got 40 boys in a circle. You're in the middle of the circle, and they're all on one knee looking up to you. You know that image.
Mm-hmm.
My thing with coaches is, at that moment, you're more important than almost anybody in his life. At that moment, I'll put it this way: at that moment, you're the most important person in his life. Yeah. What a wonderful time to talk about something other than football,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so we impress that upon coaches all the time. You know, if you stay with football for a second, the average rec league football player is not going to play in high school, and the average high school football player is not going to play in college, and the average college football player is not playing in the pros. And if you do make it to the pros, they say it takes about 3 years before you actually make it.
Mm-hmm.
If for those that do make it, in 5 years you're a veteran. In 8 years on average, you're done.
Mm-hmm.
8 years you're about 28, 29. Still a very young man, but your professional football career is over. And there's evidence of that. If you look at the roster of a football team, which is 53 players, you'd be far-fetched to find more than 5 players on that team that have double-digit years. It's really incumbent upon us as men to understand that. And when we share that with coaches, we say, so what is this really all about?
Yeah. It's not about the football.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's not, yeah.
And so how are you really using, you know, this opportunity in your time when you really think about it? What is it really, really all about? What am I really trying to accomplish here?
Mm-hmm.
You know? Same with athletes. We tell them all the time, you know, you walk into a room, boys might have been waiting for 2 hours on you and they're still sitting on the edge of their chairs.
Mm-hmm.
They're there because you're a football player. But
Yeah.
you know these boys ain't playing no football for the most part. outside of,
Mm-hmm.
So that's really our job, not just to impart the importance of that on it, but also to help them to develop a voice,
Yeah.
to talk about this stuff.
Yeah.
We're the first generation of men really having a responsibility to talk about healthy masculinity. So this is relatively new to us.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not only about engaging the men who can expedite our efforts, it's about giving them the tools of what we're asking them to do, because the goal is to normalize healthy masculinity.
Mm-hmm. And is healthy masculinity just outside the man box? Is it those qualities, or is it knowledge of the man box but choosing your own path? Like, what are the kind of things that can contribute, or like someone should aspire to kind of live a life that embodies healthy masculinity?
Yeah, so it's all of that, right? It's about men being off of remote control, no longer just doing tradition, understanding who they are emotionally, you know, invested in being authentic, knowing where we fall short as it results, knowing where we fall short as it relates to masculinity and manhood, right? That I fall short all the time, but I'm not ignorant to having. I'm not a perfect vessel, so I'm going to fall short, but I'm not ignorant to having fell short. I know it. I make choices that are not healthy choices, but I'm not going into it, with blinders on when I choose to do that. I'm not a perfect vessel. That's not what we're talking about here. We're really talking about men understanding who we are as a person, as it relates to authenticity, also understanding the impact we have on others' lives. It's really important for we as men to understand gender dynamics, gender roles, gender experiences, particularly in a society like ours that's a male-dominating society, right? We talk a lot about racism, right? We don't talk much about sexism, right? At a call to men, we don't even use sexism that much because that's such a drawback for
Trigger,
men.
yeah.
But it's a trigger. But we do talk about male dominating,
Mm-hmm.
right? We live in a male dominating society. And so if we're going to talk about healthy masculinity, we also have to talk about what that means and challenge that. We live in a society where men's violence against women continues to be at epidemic proportions. One of the leading causes of injury to women in our nation is men's violence against women. Whether you're talking about domestic violence, sexual violence, whether you're talking about trafficking, whether you're talking about discrimination, whether you're talking about sexual harassment in the workplace, you put it all together. One of the leading causes of injury in our nation, one of the leading causes of death for women is men's violence against women and girls. That's the result of a male-dominating society where we as men have not done our work to embrace healthy masculinity. And the truth of the matter is, it's a minority of men in comparison to the rest of us that's perpetrating the violence.
Mm-hmm.
The majority of us don't perpetrate violence. But the reality is we're silent to the violence.
Mm.
That's a fair conversation for we as men to have. How is it that a minority of men, in comparison to us, and it's important to say in comparison to us because there's still a lot of men, but as a minority of men in comparison to us collectively, they say somewhere around 20%, is a minority of men in comparison to us collectively who perpetrate violence against women and girls. So how is it, though? It's a fair question for we as men who would not do such a thing. It's a fair question for us to grapple with. How is it that a minority of men are perpetrating an epidemic of violence against women and girls in our presence? That's a fair question. There's a lot that we don't think about. When you and I are done here tonight, right? Let's say it's just you and I and the camera person, right? I'm out, right? When you say, okay, Tony, it's good hanging out with you, I'm out. But it was two women here interviewing with each other, they leave together. They don't leave each other here because it's not safe. We don't even think about it, right? We don't even think about it. If, women are taught where to park their cars and where not, to try to park by a light, if you're at a mall, to not park next to a van because you'd be accosted next to a van, all kind of things women are taught to protect themselves that we as men are oblivious to. Women look in the back seat of their car before they click it and get in. I don't do that. I mean, I even got an attitude about it. Like, look, when you look in the back seat of my car, do you know who car this is? It's Tony Porter's car. You look in the back seat of the car. That's ridiculous. Because if somebody's in the back seat of my car and I'm driving along and they sit up in the back seat of my car, I'm going to tell you the truth, Henry. I don't know which is going to come first or second, whether I'm going to pass out first or pee on myself first. But in my mind, right, as it relates to being a man, that's like ridiculous to look in the back seat of my car. So, but it's so much women do. Look, man, at the end of the day, they love us. They take care of us in many respects, and they live in community with us. And with all of that happening, they also have to protect themselves from us, right? And they don't tell us, for the most part, what protecting themselves on a day-to-day basis looks like. They don't overwhelm us with that reality of what they think about, what they do, the decisions they make, where they go, what they're negotiating. They don't tell us what they do on a day-to-day basis to live in community with us as men and protect themselves from us all at the same time. We as men can no longer be ignorant to this here and just be all la-di-da, and just moving along. Like Cedric the Entertainer would say, all willy-nilly. We can't do that anymore, right? And as long as we continue to do this, there's 20% of men who are fostering this epidemic of violence against women and girls in the presence of men who would not do that. They're relying on us to remain ignorant. So the work you're doing here, the work I do, we really have to continue to find ways to not only emphasize this information, but to bring men into the fold. Probably won't happen in my lifetime, but that's cool. I'm down with, that's a reality for many social justice movements. People who did the work that the fruits of that labor didn't happen during their lifetime. I'm 100% cool with that. But we need that critical mass of men. We need to normalize healthy masculinity.
Yeah, there's a lot in there. And I want to pick or drive in on this kind of silent population where it's this population of men that doesn't believe in or won't perpetuate violence against women, doesn't believe in it, but may see, is the individual problem that turns into a collective problem, that each individual believes that their job is done if they don't do the actual violence.
Yeah.
And is the goal, is what needs to happen, is the job to change from I'm not going to perpetuate violence and my job is done to the job is not done. It's doing the job of the entire collective, because the women in our communities are viewing the men as the whole population without knowledge of who may perpetuate it or who may not.
Yeah, no, that's real. I think part of it is we live in a society that's rooted in individualism, right? Now, I mean, I'm cool with that to a certain extent, right? But we don't live in a society that in many respects operates as a group.
Yeah.
We're individuals. We're part of a group, but we're not required to operate as a group. And so as long as I'm taking care of me and mine, my job is done.
Yeah.
As long as, it's almost like this, man. A woman could, and we're not always, I don't want your folks to think that, you know, the whole answer to ending violence is interrupting violence or intervening. I'm not taking it off the table because sometimes it's required, but it is a personal choice because you are putting yourself in harm's way.
Right.
Right? But we can end the violence, intervene in the violence through the promotion of healthy masculinity, right? That's a way that we all can participate in preventing the violence. But if we were going to talk about actually intervening, we're in a bar, I say bar because things happen in bars, but we could be anywhere and a guy is hurting a woman. You have one man that intervenes and one man that doesn't, right? That man that doesn't really doesn't lose any credibility at the end of the day. You know, some people might say, oh, you know, this guy didn't do anything, but but at the end of the day, he still gets to move on with his life. He doesn't lose any credibility for being a man. You know, this one man's personal choice versus another. He doesn't lose any credibility. And that's kind of how we operate as a society, as, you know, individuals. That same man might be told, don't intervene. You know, you might get hurt. Don't intervene. I'm talking about intervention now. And at the same time, our work is primarily around prevention. But I guess the point I'm trying to emphasize, and I'm not doing a great job at it at this moment, the point I'm trying to emphasize is that I don't lose any credibility necessarily as a man when I'm solely invested in me and mine. I have no vested interest in other people and their experiences. I don't lose any credibility with that being my position. And I think we should. Right? I really think we should. And I'm not necessarily talking about violence intervention as just much as how we embrace the human experience, right? One of the things women would challenge me on in the early days, I was trying to get men to feel what I was saying. So I would use their daughters as an example, or their wives as an example, or their sisters, or somebody that they love and care about. What would you do kind of situation. And women said, that's cool, Tony, but I really want men to be invested in the experience of women in general. That's the real goal, right? And I can appreciate that. And so what that helped me to begin to understand, well, why are we not? One of the things that I learned through that education from women, and I'll be honest with you, that most of what we're talking about, women taught me. I just know how to learn how to put a spin on it in a way, A, that made sense to me as a man, and B, how to share that with men. But foundationally speaking, what we're talking about, women taught me. And so in that challenge around, we need men not just to be interested in their daughters and women they love. We need men to be interested in women in general. And that sent me on a journey. So why are we not? And this is where I landed. When you think about the collective socialization of manhood, or when you think about the man box, men are taught to define what it means to be a man by distancing ourselves from what we perceive to be the experience of women and girls. Right? You think about so many aspects of what we define as manhood or in the man box is defined by distancing ourselves from women and girls. So if women and girls can share their feelings and emotion, men can't, right? If women and girls can ask for help, men can't. And by the way, asking for help is a sign of weakness. And women are the ones we would define as weak, right? And men are tough, strong, aggressive, dominating, all the rest of that stuff. But at the bottom line, we teach boys to define what it means to be a man by distancing themselves from the experience of girls. We don't give boys the opportunity to have an interest in the experience of girls until sexual conquest becomes their goal. That's nothing I'm saying is 100%. It's not an exact science, but far too often is our reality. Boys are taught not to have an experience in the interest of, boys are taught not to have an interest in the experience of girls until sexual conquest. And conquest is, it's not even sexual relationship. In many cases, not all, is conquest. But I think the point I'm trying to make is lack of interest. We're taught to define what it means to be a man by having a lack of interest in the experience of girls later become women. A women's studies course in a co-ed school, 30 students in the class, you'd be hard pressed to find 5 men in that class, right? To be in that class, men would, how do they make sense of being in that class? 3 credits, and we would make an assumption they're easy. Why not? They're about women. It's an easy course, right? That's devaluing women. I'm there to meet women. It's 30 students and only 3 dudes in here. This is a great place to meet women. Or we'll make the assumption that he's gay, right? Because that makes sense to cisgender heterosexual men. Well, maybe he's gay. But let's say he's not gay. Not that anything wrong with that. Let's be clear about that. But let's say he's not gay. It's not an easy course. And he's not there to meet women. You put 5, 6, dudes together and have a conversation about just that, they would be hard pressed to make sense of why is he in that class if none of those are the variables. Well, what is he doing in the class? Well, he's just there because he has an interest in the experience of women. That's hard for us to grapple with when we've been socialized all our lives to define what it means to be a man by distancing ourselves from the experience. And it does not mean we don't love and care for women, but that's our circle. Now we're back to talking about women in general. So that's part of our job also, is to help men have an interest, a collective interest in the experience of women, right? That's a big part of solving this problem. That helps us to move away from the grapple or the challenge or to fix that question of how is it that this minority of men can perpetrate this epidemic of violence against women and girls in the presence of all these men who would not do such.
Yeah, the example is so clear, and I think it poses a good challenge to those listening who put yourselves in that shoes of a student who's looking at a curriculum of potential classes to choose from, and what the motivations might be for choosing a class like that, and why it might not have been your first instinct to choose that class. Why is that maybe not an interesting topic for you? Or was it one of the other variables that you mentioned that would have fit more cleanly and like, oh, that makes sense for why it was chosen? The lack of interest, as you described it, I'm guessing has a bunch of different things that feed into it. There's the individualism, where like Western society is very individual and it's not community focused. There's like an empathy piece where you're extending beyond who you are, where if you are part of this silent population that isn't interested or speaking out, not perpetuating, but it may not affect you directly. I think explaining the channels where it can affect you indirectly, like when women suffer at the hands of this minority of men that are actually perpetuating, society collectively suffers, and the individuals do end up feeling the cost of that. It may not be direct, but there are the indirect effects of that. And so I don't know if that channel makes sense to you as like a way for that silent population to understand that like this will affect me. I just may not see the pathways.
Yeah. I mean, we use that, or that is used, that's science. That's counting and measuring, though, right? That's not just promoting humanity, right? That's a way, a profit and loss, ideology of helping us to understand the impact it's having on our lives, on our lives collectively. But it's not really just purely focused on the human experience. It's really focused more on counting and measuring, which is very much part of our Western culture of that's science, the science of it. Even today, we have to really have data. Our work has to be evidence-based. It has to be data-driven to get funding, to do the work, to get many of folks who can make or break our efforts, to get them to listen. They really want quantitative data, not the qualitative data. They don't want to hear about people's stories and their experiences. They want it to be evidence-based. We got to prove to them why. And I mean, to some degree, I'm cool with that. And one of the reasons I love academia, because they provide us with that, because, it's hard to measure prevention, but we've been at it now for, I can remember when I first started doing this work, it was very difficult, but we've been at it for a while. So, the data is there. And we're a data-driven society. We're a society rooted in counting and measuring. But wouldn't it be really cool? Wouldn't it be wonderful if we embrace this simply because it's the right thing to do, right? It's the right thing to do. We're talking about 51% of our population, right? It's the right thing to do. So, one of the things you make me think of also is collectively speaking, not individually speaking, but collectively speaking, we as men can learn a lot from women. A lot. I actually believe that collectively speaking, women are a much better representation of how we as a society would want to define humanity, right? I'm not discrediting men in any of our contributions. I'm not talking about individual people, just collectively speaking. I think women represent humanity, in a way that is foreign to many of us when we allow ourselves to really think about it. We can learn a lot from women about humanity. I'm not saying men don't protect and guard and care and give their lives and all of that stuff. But humanity, that kind of love that we're talking about, the unconditional love, the nurturing, this man box has really challenged us as men. We're in a tough spot.
Yeah.
When you think about it.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, and I think I think I feel that strongly, and wasn't giving men enough credit, which is, I think, a blind spot for me, is in like trying to find the pathways for an individual to realize that they may internalize a cost if women are suffering in like a very circuitous route of like, how is this going to affect me, which isn't giving men enough credit to feel it in the heart and not the head, as we were talking about in the beginning. But it's an important reminder for me that that part, I think like we have to have the optimistic approach that is always there. It may be like beaten or hidden or scared, but it is always there as a part of humanity. And like that is the only like systematic, sustainable, like human way
Mm-hmm.
to drive change.
Yeah.
Because if the root of it in like that circuitous pathway I was talking about is selfish, like, oh, I'm just going to hurt myself if I do this, is not a sustainable realization because it's calculus and it's not heartfelt.
Mm-hmm. And I appreciate that, and it makes me think of what keeps me at the table is I truly do have hope for men. I I I don't want to discredit us like this, like we can't do this. I have hope for us. I believe, that this is not out of our reach. And I've been doing it long enough, for about a generation, that I can give testimony of where we were collectively in my experience, in my journey, when I started doing this work, to where we are today. And as much work as we still have in front of us, I've seen the progress that demonstrates that we're capable.
Are there any stories that come to mind of, oh, this was really inspiring, or this was a challenging scenario that turned out really well, that kind of encapsulates some of that change?
I think of two stories. I don't know if they encapsulate the change, but they motivated me. Right. One was a boy who I had asked if the man box didn't exist, right? If the man box no longer existed, what would life be like for you? And he was about 10, 12 years old. And he said, I would be free, right? That really touched me deep. Another motivating story for me was having a boy say to me, I asked him, I said, how would you feel if your coach in front of the other players told you was playing like a girl? And I thought he was going to say, I'd be mad, I'd be sad, I'd be pissed off, or something like that. You know what I mean? Be mad at the coach or something like that. And he said, it would destroy me. And for me, I said to myself, if it would destroy him to be told that he's playing like a girl, what are we teaching this boy about girls? That it would destroy him. He was about 12 years old. These are the kind of stories that really have motivated me to do the work. And then I listen today, though, to young men, boys, talk about what they learn. Like, we have a curriculum, a live respect curriculum. And at the end of the curriculum, boys do videos and, little vignettes of what they learned. And then to hear the boys talk about, how, the various things they learned about respect, about authenticity, about caring for others. It just tells me, it just continually tells me this is not out of our reach. When I first started working with athletes, I'll just give you this example. I work with a lot of rookies in the NFL. And it's their first year in the NFL, and they get a lot of training, a lot of classroom stuff. And I go in and do a lot of that work. And I asked them questions about domestic violence. I asked them questions about sexual violence. I asked them questions about healthy masculinity. They know the answers because they're getting that information now in high school. They're getting that information now in college. And there was years ago where it was like foreign language to even, foreign language for them to know the answers, but what's even more foreign was for me to even have the opportunity to talk to them. Mm-hmm. They know. Now, it doesn't mean everybody is doing everything, but the level of awareness today is great. I can actually say is great. The level of awareness with young people today, where this information is coming from, and the various avenues. We still got a lot of work to do in respect to normalizing, but the awareness has increased so much over the last 25 years. You know what I mean? You have a podcast that's dedicated to healthy masculinity. I mean, it wouldn't have been a podcast 25 years ago. It might have been a talk show or something, but it would have still been unheard of, right? It would have been unheard of, the idea of it, right? So we've made tremendous inroads. Not enough to do any cartwheels up and down the hallway. We got a lot of work to do, but we've made tremendous inroads, you know, in regards to the spaces and the places. I work a lot with faith communities, another very rigid, male-dominating institution. Again, many inroads in those spaces where, you know, biblical text is where it could be manipulated pretty much to work in whatever word you're preaching. You got many men of faith who have learned the impact of their words and are reversing those behaviors. I see it all the time in faith communities. So there are these spaces, these male-dominating spaces that have made a lot of changes over the years. And I'm not saying that to say to any of your viewers that we got this thing under control, because we don't, you know, based on, you know, how, you know, I don't know if you're in evolution, I don't know if you know, if you're into creation, but wherever you land, you know, we've been doing this for a long time. Right, we got a lot of work still ahead of us. But in this generation that I've been involved in the work, I've seen tremendous change in how we father, right? How we raise our sons, you know, even who we are as men when it comes to taking care of our children. We know today that you're not babysitting, you're taking care of your children. I see dads with, you know, little packs on the front, packs on the back. We got changing tables in the men's room. It's just things that we've done. You know, I remember when we first put the changing tables in the men's room, you can see 5 guys around one dude and his baby helping them out, like the way we used to be under the hood of a car. You know, all of us trying to figure it out together. But that's, you know, that's normalized. Men, you know, taking care of their children, stay-at-home dads, all of this stuff, you know. We see the change, we see the progress we've made. Still got a lot of work to do, though.
Yeah.
Still got a lot of work to do.
The Under the Hood Talk name came from our first interview, was with a mechanic under his car. That's the just funny aside of where
I remember those days. That's kind of, in most places that's gone. You know, you got the old classic cars, so, you know, they don't have all the, you know, the computer. But, you know, I remember the days, you know, under a car hood. You know, I can still remember how to change an alternator, generator, starter, you know, and it'd be 5 or 6 of us under that hood. Only one guy knew what he was doing. The rest of us is just talking. Pretending. Yeah, but it was a place for men to congregate, right? We would congregate, we would learn, and we would be together, you know. It was better than, you know, being on the computer all day. I mean, as a kid, the worst thing in the world was to tell a kid, boy or girl, you can't go outside and play. That's no source of punishment today. Yeah, now it's give me your phone. Yeah. Before it was you can't go outside. Now it's give me your phone. Then that's a whole conversation in of itself. You know, the impact of social media and all the things that is good for us and is provided in society speaking. But, you know, our interpersonal skills and desire to be together, you know, a lot of that's been replaced by a screen. Yeah. And there's challenges that come with that also.
Well, it's really helpful to hear, like you said, the problems exist, but it's not hopeless. And some of the most profound examples come from the mouths of kids when they say something where it just hits you like, whoa, like that. Some of the biggest realizations come from there. So to hear examples where change happens, and the problems are highlighted is helpful to hear. And I think connecting it to the phones and social media, if you scroll for an hour or two on the phone, it can feel pretty hopeless because you're just getting thrown the combative stuff, the triggering stuff, the aggressive stuff, and it feels like there's no hope. But when hearing real work, real people, real examples, it just, I think, is critical to not lose motivation.
Yeah. I'm a fan of podcasts for that reason, because while it's still using the tools of social media, it's people talking.
Yeah.
People talking.
Mm-hmm. And it's longer form. It forces you to sit
hang in
down or do some chores, put in your headphones.
Yeah.
I agree. So it's a really helpful medium. Well, we're coming up on time, so I want to see if there's anything else that we haven't covered, or any message you had to listeners, either to a tidbit of advice or a piece of motivation, kind of a call to action, anything to open the floor with.
I want to thank women for continuing to step in this space, this gap, raising boys to be men. And I'm not saying men don't do it, but I'm simply saying far too often, or too often enough, we leave in our socialization that says men don't nurture, right? Which means men don't pretty much take care of our children in many respects. We don't. And nurturing requires tolerance, patience, love, unconditional love. All of this is part of nurturing. We don't do that well as men. So we've kind of left a lot of that to the care of women. I believe, as I said earlier, about humanity and women, a much better representative of humanity. I really want men to kind of not to be defensive by what we're talking about here, but to find what they can grab a hold of. Maybe you can't grab a hold of all of it. I'm cool with that, but don't grab a hold of what you don't feel to be true and then just run with that. Look for what is true in this time together and grab a hold of that. If we're saying violence against women is at epidemic proportions, and it is, you can check with the CDC, you can do a quick Google search, and you'll know that to be true. They say somewhere between 30 and 50% of women who are killed in our society are killed by their husband, boyfriend, or partner. That's insane. Do a quick Google search. You don't have to believe what I'm saying. You'll know it to be true. How is it that we live in a society with this epidemic of violence against women and girls, right? And either we're ignorant to it, meaning we don't know about it, or we're just silent to it. Neither one are good, right? I want to encourage men to think about this. And if these numbers are correct, and they are, but you do your search, I firmly believe that if women could end the violence on their own, it only makes sense to me that they would have already. I can't count on the men who are perpetrating the violence, but I'm holding out hope for them, right? But who's left from this equation, if we was going to make it such, is us, men who would not perpetrate the violence, right? We have to be part of the solution. I also want to say that trauma breeds trauma. And hurt people hurt other people. It would be unfair for me to talk about domestic violence and the epidemic of it. 7 out of 10 women are killed when they leave. That's the most dangerous time for a woman. Somewhere between 30 and 50% of women who are killed in our society, as I said, are killed by their husband, boyfriend, or partner. But you know what else is also true? 80% of men who perpetrate domestic violence grew up in a home where domestic violence was present. He was either affected, meaning it happened to him, or affected, meaning it happened to the person he cared about more than anybody else in the whole wide world. Right? trauma breeds trauma. I'm not saying that 80% of men who grow up in a home where domestic violence is present become violent. You can have 3 brothers and they make a pact, I'm never going to be that. But what I am saying is you put 100 men in a room who all admit to being perpetrators of domestic violence, 80 of those men would also say, it happened to me too, right? Sometimes we have to take a step back and not always land on why did he do it, but sometimes we might need to also ask the question, what happened to him, right? That's a fair question, right? When you're thinking about men and men's trauma, when you think about men and men's mental health, right? These are important things that we have to grapple with. This same collective socialization that's fostering an epidemic of violence against women and girls is killing us too. We mentioned it earlier, men complete suicide 4 times at the rate of women. They say about 6 million men go undiagnosed for anxiety and depression annually, undiagnosed, right? Because we're just keeping it moving, right? We're taught collectively as men that anger is the only emotion we give each other permission to express. We don't talk about fear. We don't talk about sadness. We don't talk about pain. Right? All of that we got to keep to ourselves. We don't practice preventative medicine, right? Because asking for help is a sign of weakness, right? Even when we go to the doctor, and usually somebody made us go, but even when we go, we'll be in his office and tell him about everything except for that pain in my side that's been bothering me for 3 years. It's almost psychotic when you think about it, that I would leave his office and not tell him about that. Like I got to keep that to me. Why would I need to keep that to myself? It makes sense women live about 7 years longer than men. They say men who are partnered are healthier than men who are not. And guess what, Henry? It has nothing to do with the man. Right? So the stuff that we're talking about today, I don't want men to just get stuck in, oh, you're just talking about gender-based violence prevention and just dogging out men. No. This collective socialization of manhood, this man box, it's killing us too. So my message to the men is, to the people is, it's really important for we as men to really work toward authenticity, being our authentic selves, to move away from being a role self to being our whole self.
I have nothing to add to that. I really appreciate the time and the lessons and sharing with everyone.
I appreciate you having me.